Jeff out there, right?
What's that?
You didn't see Jeff Roberts out there?
I didn't.
Okay.
We need one more for quorum.
All right, everybody, with the time being 1:30, we will call the STRGBA GSA workshop to order. We do have a quorum. We're missing a few members, but we do have a quorum. So starting on my right, far right here, Christy McKinnon, with Stanislaus County. My immediate right, Timothy Barahona with City of Modesto. I am Eric Thorburn with Oakdale Irrigation District, and to my left, I have Paul Pichot with MID. So this is going to be a normal board meeting. So we will start out with item number 2, which is business from the public. At this time, interested persons are welcome to introduce any topic within the GSA's jurisdiction. Matters presented under this heading may be discussed, but no action will be taken by the GSA at this meeting. It's not required, but speakers may provide their name and address. Public comments will be limited to 5 minutes per speaker. I'll just note that the focus of this workshop is the well mitigation program, so any comments focused on other topics would be appropriate to bring up under this agenda item. So we'll open it up to the public. No, I brought this one. And Jennifer, you can see on the phone? I can't see on the phone, and we don't have the ability to see here. We're good? Okay. All right, we'll move on to the bulk of the meeting here. Item number 3. This is the well mitigation program. This is the focus of the workshop today. This is a discussion item, so no action will be taken at this meeting on the well mitigation program. The expectation also is that each agency will ultimately discuss and receive direction from their respective boards and councils before ultimately taking action at a future GSA meeting. So with that, I'll hand it off to Jeff. Let the record show that Jeff Roberts from the City of Oakdale joined us at 1:32 as well. Welcome, Jeff. So with that, I'll hand it over to our consultant, Todd Groundwater, Liz, and Iris. Take it away.
Thanks, Eric. Can you hear me okay? And do we need to toggle over to the presentation?
Presentation's not up yet, so we can talk to IT to make sure it gets pulled up. I think we should be able to see it on the computers up there.
Oh, here we go. Okay. Okay, well, thank you all in person and also who've tuned in on Zoom for attending today. We are currently working with the GSA to develop a well mitigation program. And so the purpose of today's presentation is just kind of give you an overview of how we got here and what we've done so far, and also to introduce self-help enterprises to you. So why do we need a well mitigation program? Well, there have been long-term groundwater level declines in the non-district east management area that have propagated into both OID and MID's management areas. 2027 interim milestones below the minimum threshold were developed during GSP development for monitoring wells within the non-district east and OID management areas. Groundwater levels are anticipated to decline before recovering as a result of the projects and management actions. And DWR has made clear to the GSA that they require the GSA to provide mitigation for any affected wells. So the revised GSP, which was submitted to DWR July 2024, about a year ago, and then approved in February of this year, includes an analysis of potential impacts to water supply wells due to groundwater levels decreasing to the minimum thresholds and reaching their interim milestones. And I will get into some of the details of this analysis and results in a few minutes. But I wanted to start out by just explaining what interim milestones are and what they mean. When we developed the GSP, the original GSP that was submitted to DWR in January 2022, we anticipated MT exceedances, minimum threshold exceedances, were going to occur. Because during that time, dry conditions continued throughout water year 2022, and water levels continued to decline in the eastern subbasin in the RMWs, the representative monitoring wells in the monitoring network. We knew that projects and management actions would take time to be implemented and to have an effect on water levels and to support the minimum thresholds. And we expected that significant declining trends would continue. This is no surprise. And so accordingly, 2027 interim milestones were designated below the minimum thresholds for some wells. And those wells were in the non-district east management area, as well as the Oakdale Irrigation District management area. So the illustration on the right kind of, it just illustrates how these IMs were developed for the wells in the non-district east and OID management areas where IMs are below minimum thresholds. So this illustration shows the minimum threshold is the orange line. Everything below that minimum threshold is in the pink. So the 2027 interim milestones for wells in the non-district east and OID management areas are below the minimum threshold. And this is what you're seeing in 2027. So the IM is below the MT, the minimum threshold. The next interim milestone in 2032, these are developed every 5 years, is at the minimum threshold level. So developing the IMs below the MT is a recognition, again, that it would take time for projects and management actions to be developed and implemented in order to have an effect on water levels. And the goal is that in 2027, we'll be hitting the inflection point where water levels will reach their lowest level and then begin to rise, so that by 2032, we hit the minimum thresholds in these wells. At last week's GSA meeting, we provided an overview of the fall 2024 groundwater level analysis. This analysis is for the following year's, next year's annual report, which is due to DWR April 2026, which will be for water year 2025. So fall 2024 is part of water year 2025. But in case you missed that presentation last week, we just wanted to go through a few slides and show you some water level trends that we have been seeing. So this map shows all of the wells in the Eastern Principal Aquifer that are in the monitoring network. Wells that are highlighted green had water levels that were above the minimum threshold in fall 2024. Wells that are highlighted red had water levels that were below the minimum threshold in fall 2024. In fall 2024, 27% of the wells had water levels below the minimum threshold in the Eastern Principal Aquifer. The specific count, there were 27 wells that were above the minimum threshold, those are the green dots, and 10 wells that were less than the minimum threshold, those are the red dots. And there were 2 wells that were not measured because of casing obstructions. 14 of these wells have interim milestones, and water levels in all of the wells that were measured, which are 13, with one not measured because, again, the casing obstruction. But water levels in all the wells with interim milestones were above the interim milestones. So we didn't have any water levels that were below the interim milestones or even at the interim milestones. And so how does this compare to the previous year? Fall 2023 was pretty similar. There were 11 wells in this network that had minimum threshold exceedances. So a year before this, there were 11 red dots, which was about 30%. So I'm going to show you a few hydrographs from the Eastern Principal Aquifer that just illustrate some of the trends that we're seeing. It starts out with this well called Clarabelle 206. And the inset map on the lower right-hand side of the slide shows you where this well is located. This well is located in the western area of the Eastern Principal Aquifer. So this hydrograph and the next 2 that you'll see have water levels that were measured, available water levels that were measured anywhere between 1990 and fall 2024. And so the last point on this hydrograph that you're seeing is the most recent measurement that we've analyzed. So the fall 2024 water level on this hydrograph, as you can see, is above the minimum threshold. The minimum threshold is that orange line. And you can see, throughout historical measurements, there's seasonal fluctuations. You can also see in 2014, there's sort of a shift. Before 2014, most of the water levels in this well were above an elevation of about 60 feet. And then in 2014, the start of that severe drought, the remaining measured data are mostly below 60 feet. So there's a shift there that you can see. And since 2014, water levels have been relatively stable with expected seasonal fluctuations. So moving to the east, this is a hydrograph from Bentley OID2. In the fall of 2024, the water level was just a hair below the minimum threshold. Again, minimum threshold is that orange line. Water levels in this well were first measured in early 2005. And over this about 20-year period, you see sort of a declining trend. Elevations were about 100 feet in 2005 and most recently about 70. So we're looking at a decline of about 30 feet over this 20-year period. Over the last couple of years, wet years, the water levels have been pretty stable in 2023 and 2024. Moving further to the east, this is a hydrograph from Paulsell 1, OID 11. There are two Paulsell wells right in the similar area that have very similar trends and data. And you can see in fall 2024, we're below the minimum threshold, below that orange line. The eastern wells have the highest rates of water level decline. And this well, and also with the Paulsell 2 well, first measured in early 2005, and at an elevation of about 145. And most recently, the elevation is about 75 in fall 2024. So we're looking at about a 70-foot drop over this 20-year period. And we're seeing similar magnitude of drop in the other Paulsell well. Now, there are also a few monitoring wells in this area that I'm not showing you hydrographs for, but that were constructed in late 2020, and they were first measured in 2021. So we've got just a few years of data at those monitoring wells. What we're seeing is that the water level decline between 2021 and 2024 that we see in this Paulsell well as well as the other one is pretty similar in magnitude to the monitoring wells, on the order of 10 to 15 feet. So we know that these Paulsell wells, I'm showing you this Paulsell well hydrograph because we have really good history. The monitoring wells show similar trends in the last few years, water level decline of 10 to 15 feet in this area. So now getting back to the well impacts analysis that was part of the 2024 revised GSP. The analysis that we did is twofold. We looked at what would happen if water levels went to the minimum threshold, and what would happen if we went to the interim milestone where it's below the minimum threshold. And so the first thing that we did is we pulled in records of wells from anywhere we could find data. Most of the data is from DWR. But this analysis includes records of about 4,500 wells, and they're all water supply wells, municipal, industrial, domestic, and agricultural wells. The analysis includes all water supply wells that have construction information, regardless of how old the well is or the status. We don't know if these are active or inactive wells. So in essence, this is a conservative estimate and conservative analysis where we estimate, the estimate is probably a little higher than actual because we don't know if these wells are active or not, right? There's no way of knowing that from these well records. So what we did is we looked at the representative monitoring wells in the monitoring network, and we looked at the elevation of the minimum threshold and the interim milestone and compared it to the total depth of these well records. This slide is showing you sort of the results, a picture of the wells used in the analysis and the wells that were part of the result of the minimum threshold analysis. So the gray dots that you're seeing are all of the wells that were included in the analysis, that 4,500 wells. And you know, you're not sitting there counting dots, but certainly there are not 4,500 dots on this map. And the reason is because of a lot of wells are located center of section. And so there are a lot of wells located in the same location. And that's just the best information that we have from DWR. And so you can see sort of the gridded pattern in the eastern subbasin. That's because of the center section location. Locations are a little bit better in the west. So what we first did is looked at the minimum threshold elevation at the representative monitoring wells and compared it to the total depth of the well. If the minimum threshold elevation is below the total depth of the well, well, it assumes that the well has gone dry, right? So with that analysis, we estimated that about 126 wells would be indicated to be dry when the levels go below the minimum threshold. And those are shown as the red dots on this map. Most of these, 125 out of 126 wells, are in the eastern principal aquifer, to the east of the Corcoran Clay, and one of them is in the western upper principal aquifer, along the Tuolumne River. And then we did the same analysis for the interim milestone. We compared the interim milestone elevation, where below the minimum threshold at the wells in the non-district east and OID management areas. We compared the interim milestone elevation to the well elevation. And if the interim milestone elevation is below the well elevation, bottom of the well elevation, then the well is at risk of being dry. And the result of that were that there were approximately 29 wells that could be dry when levels go below the minimum threshold to the IM. And again, those are shown as the red dots on this map. And those 29 wells included 27 domestic wells and 2 agricultural wells. And as you can see, all of these dry wells are in the eastern principal aquifer. We looked at the ages and the depths of these wells too, and overall, the impacted wells are older and shallower than the average age and depth of wells in the subbasin. So how many wells have actually been reported dry? Before the GSP was adopted, Stanislaus County had a reporting system for dry or failed wells. And between 2014 and 2017, 159 domestic wells were reported dry or failed. Since the GSP was adopted in January 2022, DWR has had a reporting system. And based on DWR's reporting system, there are a total of 15 wells that have gone dry, 15 domestic wells that have gone dry or failed in the last few years. And the map that I'm showing you here shows the location of those wells. In 2022, there were 13 reports of dry or failed wells. Those are the orange dots. In 2023, there were 2. Those are the green dots. And in 2024, there were no reports of dry or failed wells. Now, the reports of dry or failed wells include wells that have had pump problems, have had casing problems, and some that had water levels that declined. Most of these have been resolved during this period. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Iris.
Thanks so much, Liz. So there is a dry well situation, and the GSA is required to develop a well mitigation plan to address these dry wells. This plan document is being developed now, and a draft document will be released for public review later this year, so you'll have a chance to see it. So we're developing it, not starting from scratch, but building on documents that were prepared before in other basins. So clearly we know what the situation is here from the 2024 analysis that Liz just summarized. And then we can look at some of these other example well mitigation plans and learn from what they have done. Perhaps different circumstances, but we can learn from them. And so we wanted to look at this series. You can see eastern San Joaquin, Delta Mendota, Turlock, Chowchilla nearby, Madera, all the way down to Mid-Cahuilla, because they've been doing it. So hopefully we can learn from their experience and benefit from their good ideas. So, some key topics. As we develop this plan, we'll be thinking about 3 things. We will hold in mind what is the purpose of the well mitigation plan, what is covered and what is not. And this is in terms of what the GSA is responsible for. Dry well services, we'll look into, well, what are they? And who provides which services? And then there's going to be an application process. So for a well owner who, for whatever reason, their well is no longer providing enough water, and there can be more than one reason, and so they will basically get online, call up, and then a process will happen. So there will be a process, and the GSA will be participating in it. So we're going to talk about what it is and, generally speaking, how it rolls out. So let me start with what is the purpose of the well mitigation plan? And I've got a statement here. And you can see that this purpose statement's got some underlining in it, which has basically got 4 points that I think are particularly important for us to be thinking about. So the purpose is to provide mitigation for drinking water wells having adverse impacts due to declining groundwater levels from groundwater management activities since January 31st, 2022, which is the GSP adoption. So we're talking about drinking water wells. And there's going to be a focus, a strong focus on domestic water wells and small water system wells. And this focus is on these wells because there is a human health and safety issue here. And domestic wells often are shallow and they're vulnerable to declining groundwater levels. So that's the focus. Second, we are looking, the well mitigation program of the GSA is looking at problems that are due to groundwater level declines associated with basin management and not other problems like Liz mentioned. You know, the pump failed, the well collapsed, there's a break in the well casing, but declining groundwater levels resulting in a dry well. Then third, there is a potential for indirect impacts of groundwater level declines that might, happen to water quality, to subsidence, but we've looked at that in the GSP and we have not been able to document such relations. So we're going to keep the focus on declining groundwater levels until it's warranted otherwise to look at these things. Then lastly, the well mitigation program of the GSA is for wells with adverse impacts after January 2022, when the GSP kicked in. And there were earlier ones. We're looking at after 2022. So dry well services. And what services are provided for dry wells? Generally, these services are grouped into 3 potentially sequential responses. So again, a person contacts the county or the GSA or another organization, and like, for example, self-help, that provides such assistance and says, basically, my well has failed. It's not providing enough water. And then there's going to be a basic eligibility that's established. For example, are you in the county or in the GSA, or if you're calling from some elsewhere, you may not be eligible. And then after that, there will be an application process, but the first response is an emergency water supply. Again, we're talking drinking water. And so that typically is bottled water is delivered. Then the application process really kicks in, and if it's going to indicate, now what? So that might indicate an interim short-term solution. That can be continuing the bottled water and/or trucking water to fill a water tank. So that's the second kind of dry well service. And then the last would be a long-term solution. And that would be more like, lower the pump setting, deepen the well, provide a new well, or connect to a nearby water system. So there's a variety of different well services that can happen depending on, what's warranted. So Self-Help Enterprises is here today, and they have substantial experience in providing these services, so they can explain more in a minute. And fact is that the GSA, has some responsibility for dry wells that have dried up because of management activities, and they're going to collaborate with Self-Help to see what the problem is, and then to determine if the problem is due to the management activities, and then go from there. So, at this point, the technical consultants and the committee are recommending that the GSA work with Self-Help Enterprises to implement the well mitigation program. And we've got 3 reasons. One of them is administrative burden. If we work to get pulled together, then it reduces the administrative burden on the GSA. It increases efficiency. It will be streamlined together. It also recognizes that for the GSA, this is a short-term program, that the groundwater levels are going to hit that inflection point that Liz talked about, and then they're going to start to recover, and then the dry well problem due to management activities should be done. Other problems likely will persist, but that might be something that Self-Help continues with. And then lastly, the GSA is taking an adaptive approach to work with Self-Help and work with them during implementation and see what works best. So at this point, I would like to introduce Rhett Anderson and Lucy Bennett from Self-Help Enterprises. Welcome.
Before they step up, if you don't mind just hanging out, I want to open it up to questions at this point and get some feedback on what we just heard. So last workshop, we got a little bit off topic, so I want to focus the feedback and questions at this time on the water level trends that we saw, that Liz presented, the dry wall analysis that Liz presented, and then also just some of these draft components and the development of the draft well mitigation plan. So I'll start with the member agencies. If you have any questions or feedback on what you've heard so far, the committee has already heard from Self-Help, so we wanted to make sure that everybody got to see this presentation and open it up, had the opportunity to ask Self-Help some of the questions that we've already asked. And also, we wanted to come up with a recommendation so you guys kind of had an idea of what the background was. We wouldn't, like Iris said, we wouldn't look at a bunch of different plans. We're not making something out of, new. We're kind of taking a blend of everything else that everybody's done up to date and has generally worked for them. So it will be an adaptive approach. Administrative burden wise, we've all got day jobs. We don't want to hire a whole staff for a very short-term program. So that was the recommendation there. So with that, any comments, questions, feedback on that approach?
I have a couple of things I'd like to mention. One is just to reemphasize that the information here is actual measurements. It's not model data. I realize it's probably obvious to most, but just so there's no confusion there.
Yeah.
The other thing, if you could go back to the slide where it showed the minimum thresholds and the
This
No,
one?
the one where it showed the graphical representation was like your first slide. I just wanted to, at least in my own mind, clarify something. There it was. So, yeah, so you have the minimum thresholds and then you have the interim milestones. So from a, and this has come up in previous questions. There's various criteria, but basically in 2027, there's a criteria to reach an inflection point in 2027. And if I understand correctly, the requirement is by 2032 to bring those that are below the minimum threshold back up to the minimum threshold. Just to give a general picture of where that needs to go over the next several years.
Yeah, that is correct. For the wells that have interim milestones in 2027 that are below the minimum threshold, and again, those are the wells in the non-district east and OID management areas. The goal is to reach the minimum threshold value in 2032. So we would need to have, by 2027, reach an inflection point so that we're then bringing the water level back up. So it hits the minimum threshold by 2032.
So at that point, with the minimum threshold, that's essentially when we'd say water levels are where they're supposed to be when it's above that point. And so we wouldn't, the well mitigation program, those people that were at or above that minimum threshold wouldn't be eligible generally for the well mitigation program.
Well, potentially, yes. We'll have to look at, the area, yes, I think in areas where we're above the minimum threshold, that is the goal. And so, yeah, I think that would be correct.
Even in the near term, I mean, if the water levels in the Modesto area or the non-district west are at or above that minimum threshold, then they would be essentially not eligible for it. Is that,
Because the minimum threshold
idea?
is sort of the management of.
yeah, right, okay.
So, thank you.
I just had a question on the purpose slide here for the second point where it talks about due to basin management and not other problems. So I guess I just wanted a little bit more clarification on that one in terms of what we consider basin management. Since, if we were to have a drought and the levels were to drop down, would basin management include direct management activities and, let's say, a lack thereof? Like, let's say if projects haven't been executed, for example, in that area, therefore maybe the water levels haven't recovered because planned projects or some sort of management action or mitigation hasn't been implemented yet. Would that still qualify these, or are those excluded?
So the management starts as of January 2022 for the purposes of eligibility here. And you're absolutely,
We're recommending that. That's one of the components that we're recommending as a committee and as a consultant. That could be, we could change that, but that's our recommendation.
absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt.
And no, this is flexible and you can change it. But we really are, as you just described, looking at management where it hasn't kicked in yet to increase those groundwater levels and, keep the water levels up in different wells. It is possible if you had a management action that increased pumping in one area, that if that ended up with dry wells, that would be also eligible. But I imagine that you would know well enough, before you got into that situation.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Christie?
I have some questions for self-help, but I think I'm okay for now.
With that, we'll open it up to the public for feedback and questions. Water level trends, dry well analysis, or the draft components of the well mitigation plan and development. Yes, Jennifer's got a mic, so she's gonna be walking around so that the people can hear you on the phone as well.
Thank you, Mike, Dave. Can you hear me? All right, Mike, Dave, let's throw on Richard. Have any GSAs challenged DWR's interpretation of Sigma law that the landowners ultimately and the GSAs should should be responsible for mitigating dry wells?
I don't know of litigation that has been filed like that.
I'm unaware of any circumstances where that's happened yet. I'll come back to you.
Anthony Rado, Rado Brothers. A couple questions. The last meeting we had here about this same topic, I had asked about other small drinking water systems in the county or within the subbasin. Did we ever determine how many of those in totality we have? My thought being that that's probably more expensive to go triage than a single domestic well for an individual home. The locations of those small systems, the well construction information regarding those small systems, to be able to estimate future costs for navigating this program throughout a small system. I think people are relatively familiar, can become familiar with the cost of putting a new domestic well in, but if we're start talking about small systems, what does that really look like? And then I still question the quality component, if we're talking about nitrates and arsenics. I see the dot there on the slide that maybe we're not talking about that yet. Well, if you are on a small water system, or a domestic well and you don't think you have nitrate and all of a sudden your new system, because of the GSA has nitrates, people are gonna start to question that. So it's something I think that we need to really think through a little bit more detail before this is finalized. And then I think Eric, you brought up a good point about the minimum thresholds. There's not a lot in here currently about how to get out of how to get the GSA off the hook for repairing somebody's well if the GSA is doing what it needs to do from a management standpoint and domestic, maybe the management area is not responsible for that well going dry. So, thank you.
So I will start with your question about the small water systems. I believe the GSP has a discussion of the small water systems that are in the subbasin. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head of how many there are. I think maybe Rhett could, when we get to the Q&A after their presentation, could discuss a little bit how self-help may respond to small water systems as opposed to individual wells. He might have more to say about that than we do. And in terms of water quality, one thing that we're doing as part of the plan development is we're collaborating with Valley Water Collaborative, Perry Klassen's group, the nitrate control program. So we're absolutely got water quality in our sites, and we're not turning a blind eye to that. It's going to be, going to be on a case-by-case basis. We're going to need to evaluate, again, water quality as a result of GSA management activities. But we're going to be working with Perry's group on this topic. So we're not turning a blind eye to that. Did that answer your questions?
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Liz and Iris, and I think this somewhat relates to Anthony's earlier part of his comment. Even though there, on also John or Mike Days, even though there isn't necessarily legislation with regard to the wells, there is a level of discretion in terms of what the GSA is required to fund. Just want to make that point and you confirm that.
Yes, and I had that list of all of the different GSAs that are, in the basins. And there's some similarity because it's the same problem, but there's also diversity in how they define eligibility, what they say they're willing to fund and what they are not funding. So DWR has not, laid it out with such detail, you must do this and you must do that. Because we go back to the principle of sigma, which is local control. And so there is local discretion on how a well mitigation plan is designed and then implemented.
Are the small water system wells part of that data set you have?
Oh, yeah,
It should be, right?
should be.
We just don't have the small water systems identified specifically in that data set as small water systems.
That's right.
Okay. And there's gonna be some variation in cost depending on even domestic wells, right?
Absolutely.
And some of the other details, we're definitely gonna be ironing out as far as coverage for, and liability for, and clarity for what will be covered and what won't be covered. The minimum threshold point being an example. That'll be part of the next draft of the plan, I would envision, right? Okay, thank you.
All right, Mike Day again. I've been looking at some of the examples that you've listed, the well mitigation plans developed by other adjacent GSAs and GSPs, just to see what's, as a consultant myself, I know the easy thing is the copycat. I'm not gonna say you're gonna do that, but at least look at it hard. It seems like there's some real common elements that our neighbors have done. One is they have spread costs, at least an initial projection of what these are gonna cost over a certain period of time, and they put in seed money and they spread it equally across all the entities that prepare the GSP. It seems like 130,000 is a real common number to get a pot of money that would go toward physical and other solutions, including analysis by consultants and things. I would just discourage such simplistic thinking in our subbasin. We've got a very, we kind of know areas that are contributing these undesirable effects more than others, and so this doesn't seem fair to allocate costs equally across the subbasin. I do like the Delta Mendotas. They've got really good lists in there of things that that they are not responsible, that don't view they should be responsible for. It's a very good list. I don't think we would necessarily disagree with it. Probably very good. I do think the Delta Mendotas is probably overly complex for somebody just to read through it and understand it. Think about a well owner. So I heard some simplification of it. And I would also urge some discretion just on the level of analysis that needs to be done. I think our consultants don't necessarily need to rerun a groundwater model or do well interference analysis to kind of know, okay, well this problem area over here, yeah, it's really, you've got the models, you run it for us every 5 years, you're doing these monitoring reports, you're experts. You can probably do that without expensive analysis. So I just reserve, or would urge as a consultant, my former boss, who's now passed away, God bless him, Jim Grove, keep it simple. That was his mantra, and we have to do that. Try to keep it simple. No need to do analysis do paralysis by analysis. That unnecessary. Sometimes we have to, just to keep it fair. But anyway, just some general kind of overall comments that I see in there. We have in our subbasin, we have management areas where neighbors. Some of them have something like that. Most, like the Delta Mendota, they have the actual separate GSA. So each agency or entity is its own GSA. That would be kind of akin to what we have as far as management areas. So there could be some looking at that. The East Turlock subbasin is kind of right at the same place that we are. The nice thing, their is that the East Turlock group has really been on this for a lot longer than this basin. They saw, I worked for Eastside Water District in the 1980s on overdraft issues. They were concerned about it back then. They were paying consultants to study it. They've been talking to Turlock Irrigation District and Merced Irrigation District since the 80s about the need for surface water, and we've gotten it. So they do have agreements in place. Water's flowing, so we can certainly learn. They're, in my humble opinion, much better organized in the East. They've done an agreement between the East and the West that recognizes this flow of groundwater and compensates the West for that flow in the interim. It's a very interesting agreement. So, but they're on well mitigation about where we are, the same consultant side. But there are some things we can certainly learn just by how organized they are and proactive. So anyway, that's very quick. I think probably a lot more in the detail, and if I give somebody else.
This question is regarding the MTs, and it's more directed towards Eric and Liz. Would we be able to pull up the slide that says well impacts analysis at risk at minimum threshold? I think it's the first. Excuse me. It's the one that shows the western upper principal aquifer.
Yes, I'll get to that. This one?
Oh, it's not up yet.
Oh,
There you go.
Yes, that one.
is this one? Yeah, okay.
So, at the last meeting on May 21st, when you had the western principal aquifer hydrographs, Eric had mentioned potentially lowering the MT for that one red dot in the western principal aquifer. And I was just wondering what your rationale was, Liz, for why you would lower. I think there were two that Eric mentioned in the western principle, but I was just wondering why that would be reasonable for those specific wells.
Yeah, so the MTs will be evaluated as part of our 5-year update, which is due to DWR January 2027. We have not started that work yet, but as part of that work, we will be able to reevaluate minimum thresholds in different aquifers. We have not started doing that. If we do that, it won't be on a well by well basis. It will be by aquifer or management area. We don't know yet. We haven't gotten there. Right now, the rules for minimum threshold, the way they were developed, are uniform throughout the sub-basin.
Okay.
So yeah.
That provides me with some clarity. I think you had mentioned that because they were drilled in 2021, that
Yes.
you would lower them. You just mentioned there are ones in the eastern principal aquifer that you didn't mention the other day that were drilled in 2021. So
Yes,
I
yes.
guess as long as everything's uniformly across the basin.
And that's the goal, so the newer wells have been trickier, right? Because the minimum threshold is based on historical low elevation. And so for the wells that have a long historical record, that's easy, right? For these new wells that were installed in late 2020, we were looking at data in just 2021 before we submitted the GSP in January 2022. Very little data. So we had to make educated guesses based on nearby trends, nearby data to come up with minimum thresholds at those wells. And so that's something that we'll be looking at as part of the periodic evaluation.
Okay, perfect. That makes sense. I just wanted to make sure. It just seemed like you had to single out two wells.
Yeah, no. That's not how we're gonna do it.
Okay, yeah, when you guys have a chance, if you could clarify all this in the email, then that would be perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it was really to the point that we had limited amount of data. You wouldn't probably do that in the east because the east is a trend that's continuing downward, whereas the west is coming up and down more often. Or in the Modesto, but so there's a little bit of difference there, but We'll have to reevaluate that when we
We
get
do
there.
have some newer monitoring wells, like the ones I mentioned before, that were installed in late 2020 in the Eastern Principal Aquifer, and we'll be looking at those too. Because again, when those minimum thresholds were developed, they were developed with a limited set of data.
Yeah, I'm Bill Lyons. Can we go to the slide, why do we need a well mitigation program? I'd like to get a little clarification.
This one?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
In the first bullet, you talk about how the long-term groundwater is declined further in the non-district east management area and propagated into the OID, MID management areas. I want to make sure that I and the crowd understand what you mean by propagate. Do you mean that literally that because of the pumping on the non-district east, it's actually impacting OID and MID? And when you mean impact or propagated, are you saying that water is actually flowing towards the non-district east like it does in the Turlock area? Is that correct?
So we don't have a cone of depression like Turlock has. It's not, I mean, that is over decades and decades, and it's an enormous
said
cone.
that.
But we do have a depression in the eastern part of this subbasin. And so, yes, that's what it means, that these declines that have occurred from pumping in the non-district east have had effects on water levels in these other two management areas, OID and MID. And the MID management areas that have been affected are the pieces in the eastern subbasin, you know, the little finger that comes out in the southern part of the subbasin.
So when it comes to well mitigation, if that non-district east management area is impacting wells in OID and MID management areas, who would you recommend be responsible then for the well mitigation?
I think, you know, I think the GSA is going to be reviewing these on a case-by-case basis, and at this point, it's really hard to, you know, say one way or the other how each well, reported dry well, is going to be evaluated. It really depends on the data and where the well is at. So it's really, it's, don't know yet.
Just clarify again, the non-district east groundwater pumping is impacting portions of OID and MID.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I use this podium, please? Thank you. I'm John Bricchetto, and I farm over in Oakdale, and I'm being directly affected by these problems. I have a agricultural well, 16-inch well, probably 300 feet from the Oakdale Furtado well that has no pump in it, and it's dry because of the over pumping. I've replaced 4 domestic wells in the Oakdale area on the east side lately, last 4 or 5 years, and we don't wait till they're completely dry. We try to catch them when they still have 5 or 10 feet of water in them, but they're headed downward to avoid problems, immediate problems with my employees. But if you look at your annual report and you overlay the page 28, you overlay the groundwater pumping subbasin on top of the Eastern Principal Aquifer and the 3 wells that are dropping, which would be Wellsford, page 39, Blossom, page 43, and Paulsell, you can see all these problems are starting at the base of the non-district east. All those wells and my wells, I own property on Bentley Road around the Bentley pump. We're having nothing but problems on those areas. The Allen pump is 1,000 feet off my ranch. It's creating, I'm living it, okay? If you look at the Oakdale Irrigation District to start with, it has annexed 12 to 15,000 acres over the last 20 years. It has contracts to supply the non-district east with water. It has spent millions building and rebuilding the system, the tunnels, that come from the dams to supply more surface water to the area. Modesto Irrigation's built drinking treatment plants in the last 15 years. They recently doubled it. It spent millions on improvements. All these improvements at the OID and MID taxpayers' cost. Non-District East is not paying for any of these improvements. It's the constituents of Modesto and Oakdale Irrigation District. If you take the page 12 in your annual report, it shows 246 acres under irrigation. But as you subtract out the native vegetation, the riparian vegetation, and the idle land, it drops at 87,000 acres to 159 acres. As you reduce that by an estimated 25,000 acres of non-District East, you get down to a size, you get down to less than 150 or 130,000 acres. If you look at the second page, MID and OID's water deliveries, surface water deliveries, OID and MID are delivering 3 acre feet to the active farming fields. With our rainfall, we should have enough water right there. They're doing a great job. Thank God to them. The non-District East needs to step up. These problems are affecting me personally and all of us. The irrigation districts and cities are paying the price for all this stigma efforts, and us taxpayers are carrying the cost. The majority of the non-District East pumpers are only taking the minimum from the Oakdale Irrigation District because it's cheaper simply to pump out of the ground. There are constituents out there that are avoiding infrastructure to get pipelines to their ranches, and they're kicking this can down the road. It can't be kicked any farther. We're getting hurt. My deep wells are $250,000 agricultural deep wells to replace. It's starting to affect your tax base and your taxpayers. You cannot burden the district taxpayers anymore. They bought expensive land. They're paying high property taxes. They're paying the interest on their expensive land, which was double the price of non-District East. You can't get them any harder than they're already trying to avoid this situation. I pay for all my own decisions, good ones and not so, some that are so good. I can't afford to pay for the non-District East decisions as well. Thank you.
Robert Frobos, I would like to go to slide, how many wells have been reported dry? I would like to know how you're keeping track of that. Is that all through permits, weed permits, being sold in the county? I have 3 myself in the area that could get on the big boat, dry.
So this data, since,
How do you keep track of it?
yeah, so the bottom, so the map, and since GSP adoption, 15 domestic wells reported dry or failed. These are reports to DWR. The state DWR has a dry or failed well reporting system, and that's where we got this data from directly.
Okay, so somebody could have a well go dry and have a new one drilled and that will not get reported, is that possible?
Oh, yeah, if they haven't reported it to the state, then we don't know about it.
Okay, so that's an interesting number, 174 wells went dry since 2014 that you guys have a record of, and we don't know how many that have went dry that we don't have a record of, is that correct?
Sure.
If I may too, just to quickly ensure you understand, like she stated, that the data we have for all these wells, we haven't had boots on the ground to make sure those are all active wells either. So
right.
there's some inaccuracies and there's gonna be some discrepancies there too, but it's the best available data we have.
And the reports of dry wells between 2014 and 2017, those were reports to the county. that we got records from the county. And since GSP adoption, those records are from DWR.
My name's Ron Ratto. I've got a question about the chart that shows the interim milestone, it's 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, I've lost the presentation again. Oh, oh, okay, thank you. I'll go back to that slide. Sorry. This slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So is that, what's that chart based on? It looks like the perfect chart. And so I just wondered if that's like aspirational or a dream, or if that's based on data, or how confident are you that that's a representative chart?
That's the plan. That's what the plan is based on. So for wells where the interim milestone is below the minimum threshold, that is the plan, that is the goal.
Thank you. One other question. There's a slide that refers to drinking water wells that will be subject for replacement. Is it drinking water well, is that based on how it's constructed, or is that based on how it's used?
I believe,
Is the hand-dug well that's used for drinking, that's considered, could be considered drinking
yeah,
water
I
well?
think it's how it's used.
How it's used?
Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on Mr. Frobos's comment. So between 17 and 18, the data is coming from two different sets. My understanding is that still today, over the course of the past 5, 6 years, one would require a permit from the county to replace their drinking water well, or any well for that matter. Christy, do you know why they're pulling data from a different source and not using the county data to be consistent and potentially get better info for account for the 4 that Mr. Burketta lost and the 4 that Mr. Provost lost, plus all the other ones that are out there?
So, the state started their reporting system at a later date. So the county still does have a voluntary dry well reporting system. So anybody can call the county or come to the office and we can help refer the voluntary reporting to the state database. But the state is the ultimate source that contains all the data. So now that the state's taken over that action, we just help to facilitate that, but it's voluntary, so.
Keep track of how many permits you give out for the new wells and replacement wells?
That's a very good question. And when the well permits come in, we don't get those details. Sometimes we get wells out of water or wells failed or replacement well, but the property owner or the well contractor aren't responsible to disclose that information, but they can. And then also, we would still need permission to report that information to the state because it's a voluntary program. But we can.
I just think there's maybe a little disconnect there.
And we have all that information posted on our website for how to report dry wells.
So once there's a program for dry wells, would you expect people that have wells that have gone dry that have not been reported, like to come out of the woodworks and identify their dry well? Is that important to know anywhere?
It's possible that that will happen, yeah.
It was mainly a focus during the effects of the drought, but it's still a focus. And as we navigate into GSP implementation, especially with the development of our domestic well mitigation program, it's becoming additionally more important.
Yeah, I think we're fortunate to have that data set because the drought occurred, right? State put programs in place to compensate people who had that issue because of the drought. And then, so the database really started then. Some people didn't report their wells because they didn't want the state to come in and be part of their business, I think. But then now with Sigma in place, it's getting better and better. So I think our data sets are going to continue to get better and better.
And now we're seeing that it's more important to have more specific information, how helpful that is, instead of information that's not backed up with details as to why the well failed.
And Mr. Ratto, your other point is a very good point. with the Eastern San Joaquin Basin, which is north of the Stanislaus River, there's already a well mitigation plan in place. And with that program, you have a 6-month time period to report any well that went dry that you want to be compensated for between the time that policy went into, or the well mitigation program went into effect. So in that program, I think we're starting in 2020 because they were 2 years ahead. So between 2020 and when it starts, they have 6 months to report any of those wells to get compensated potentially through the program. So I would envision we're gonna have pretty much the same situation here as well. But those details will be worked out in the next, kind of the next stage and in the actual agreement. It's a good point.
I'd like to make just a comment about a piece of history. I think it's important. The 3 wells that I mentioned that went dry, people have asked me, well, how deep were the wells? And I said they were deep enough that they didn't go dry during the 74, 75, 76, and 77 droughts. That's be 1974 droughts. But they did go dry during the last drought we had. That's an important piece of history to understand what's happening to our aquifer. Wells, domestic wells survived droughts before. Now they're not. The other thing I'd like you, I think probably most people in this room probably know the answer, but for the record, I'd like you to state it, Eric. Who's funding, what agencies are funding the GSA? Can you put that on the record so we all know for sure?
Yeah, so there are technically 2 GSAs in this basin. The Tuolumne GSA, Tuolumne County GSA, pays an eighth. So there's 7 agencies. So we split the cost for common things like the plan and the annual reports 8 ways, and they pay 1/8, and then we all pay 1/8. For other things that are this specific to this GSA, we split it 7 ways. So Tuolumne County GSA is not part of that. For the well mitigation plan, we budgeted to put away $300,000 together and split that 7 ways. So we will have that ready. We've actually invoiced already, and we will have that in our accounts waiting and ready to implement this program come January next year.
Eric, this is just a general comment, and I really appreciate the work that the sub-basin consultants have done. Today, I had the opportunity to listen to some of the Stanislaus County Water Advisory Committee comments and discussion. I would really urge this panel or group to have their consultants make a presentation to the Stanislaus County Water Advisory Committee, because I get a feeling that they're a little more accurate and will present some non-biased opinions backed up by a lot of analysis. So I would really urge this committee or this panel or whatever we call it to try to get in front of them and provide an unbiased opinion on what's going on in the Modesto sub-basin, just as a comment.
Thanks. I want to move on here pretty soon, so just those general comments, I want to try and take at the end for moving forward, if we don't mind. We've already an hour in. I don't want to take too much longer. We're going to keep going. No, it's all right. We got 2 more, you and then one other.
So far, the GSA has divided the $300,000 7 ways. But moving forward, if there are additional costs that are going to be incurred to implement the well mitigation plan, decisions have not been made by the GSA with respect to how those costs would be divided or allocated. And so I think we need to keep that in mind as we are listening to our consultants and reviewing the data, that a one-size-fits-all approach is not appropriate. And as the additional costs are going to be incurred, we need to make sure that we are dividing the cost and allocating it to the areas where the well mitigation is going to be necessary, especially given the voluminous data that we have confirming the cause of this issue in the subbasin is the non-district east. Thank you.
Hello, Thomas on here. I had a question on the well impact analysis. So, like you guys had cited at the risk at the interim milestone. It's the one with, I'm not sure if you want to bring the map up, but it's the map looking at the interim milestone, what wells are at risk. And you know, the 29 wells potentially going dry, 27 being domestic and 2 being agricultural. I'm just curious as to, like we had heard a couple of the other well owners here going dry on the eastern side, 3 over here, and it seems like you had 4. Like, are those wells also in the analysis? So are we not seeing those, just curious as to why we're not seeing those impacts shown on the map. I'm not sure if those are just wells that aren't in the system or.
So we grabbed every record of a well that we could get our hands on. Most are from DWR's well completion report database. And we also use data that we were provided by agencies when we developed the GSP. So our data set is as comprehensive as we can get publicly. So it may very well include those wells. I don't know the exact location of those wells.
Just a follow-up question on that as well. Is it more so the static level of the well that is flagged if it's at risk for drying? So if the static level goes below the well depth, essentially, or is it like pumping capable? So it's just not capable, even though the level might be above drawdown due to the limitations of that well. Is that being accounted for in that analysis as well?
It's not looking at the pumping drawdown in the well, if it's a pumping well. It's looking at if water levels in the area are below or above the bottom of the well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. We'll have another opportunity here for questions, but I want to keep moving along just so we don't take up too much time here.
Is it only drinking water wells that are included in this? So agricultural wells that go dry, they're not part of this, correct?
Drinking water wells, yes.
In
And that's-
the program, we're proposing to only compensate for drinking water wells. In the analysis, there were some ag wells.
Yes, we
in
include all water supply wells in the analysis.
So
Ag, industrial
those
wells.
red dots, some of those could be ag wells, not just domestic wells. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right, one more question. This is it. That's all right.
I'd like to have a little clarification. We have a Riverbank representative, Oakdale, that might be calling from Modesto in county. What I'd like to know is, from the county perspective, Kristen, do you represent the non-district east, non-district west, and the balance of the county? I mean, I'd like to know your role and who you're actually representing.
That's a good question. So there's a couple things to, absolutely, to consider. So with respect to groundwater resources, the County Department of Environmental Resources is responsible for implementing the county groundwater ordinance, and that governs the operation of all wells in the unincorporated areas of the county. So if significant evidence is provided to the groundwater division to determine there's an unsustainable extraction of groundwater resources, then we have measures for corrections. So with that said, the county does have an interest in groundwater resource management countywide. With respect to implementation of the GSP indicates that the non-district west and the non-district east are under the jurisdictional regulatory authority of the county, being out of district white areas and out of the boundaries of the city limits. So we have to look at it, I think, in both ways. And then also, with that said, we're part of a GSA. So the Groundwater Sustainability Agency is responsible for the implementation of the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, and we have developed and adopted our Groundwater Sustainability Plan. With that said, we're still developing it as we develop these domestic well mitigation and demand reduction programs. So not saying that I want anything to change with respect to how we intended to manage the different management areas in the GSB, but things could change. So we do have to work that out at the GSA level and ultimately decide how these programs are going to be implemented.
Just curious, because if you look at the different maps that the consultants have put up, you're representing the non-district west, the non-district east. Appears to me that they have two different types of situations. So I would encourage you to, spend as much time as you can with both of them.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. And then also, I think it's important to realize that the Department of Environmental Resources will ultimately make recommendation based on the available information, data, and science, and not take sides with respect to the different agencies and entities involved. So.
All right, with that, we are going to move on. Self-help enterprises, so we got Rhett and Lucy, Rhett Anderson and Lucy Bennett. You think you could do it in about 20 minutes? I think, I want to have plenty of time for questions at the end. I think there's going to be plenty for you, if you don't mind. Thank you, or at least try, let's give it a shot.
Can we get the presentation up? Well, while that's happening, hello everyone. My name is Rhett Anderson. I am the Assistant Director for our Emergency Services Program at Self-Help Enterprises. My name tag will say Daniel. I'm not stealing anyone's identity. That's what's on my ID. You guys have great security in this building, so that's good, but I go by Rhett. I'm here with my colleague Lucy Bennett. She is the manager for our Tanks and Hauled Water program. Today, we're just going to give you a little overview of Self-Help Enterprises, what we do, kind of where we came from, how we got into this, and then the services that we provide. So, Self-Help, we are based out of Visalia. I'm a native Visalian. Started there in 1965, originally as a housing program for low-income families. And we kind of evolved and grew, and now we have what's called emergency services, where primarily what we do is domestic well mitigation. We include a number of other services that we can go over here. But Self-Help Enterprises, or SHE, is a nationally recognized community development organization whose mission is to work together with low-income families to build and sustain healthy homes and communities. Since 1965, Self-Help Enterprises efforts have touched over 65,000 families. Engaging, well, that's self-help as a whole. Now, our emergency services program that focuses on domestic well mitigation. Our focus is engaging with and educating our most vulnerable populations in the San Joaquin Valley with vital information about natural disasters like flood, fire, earthquake, drought, and recently, as a result of COVID, pandemics. SHE's emergency services team is committed to providing individuals, families, and communities with resources that will ensure safety and security during disaster. So, emergency services, so kind of the process of where we are. We start with emergency preparedness. So that primarily comes down to education. How can you prepare for when disasters actually do happen? How can you, be better well prepared for when things like flood or drought come through? Then we move on to emergency response. So if there is a flood, specifically in this situation, when your well goes dry, we're in charge, or we respond to those emergencies primarily with our well mitigation program. Then you go to recovery. So we go essentially from that response, that initial response, to a more permanent solution. A permanent solution would be something like, for example, drilling a new well, replacing an existing well, repairing, deepening an existing well, things like that. And then you come to resiliency. So once you have that permanent solution in place, how can you be more resilient? Again, that kind of circles back to a little bit more of the education. If you do have a new well, how can I maintain the pump? What do I do when power goes out or when my well goes dry? How do I maintain the existing well that I do have? Things like that. That's more on the educational side to make sure that folks are a little bit more resilient so that when, inevitably disaster does happen, how can you be a little bit more prepared? A little bit more about us. So our service area includes 9 counties within the San Joaquin Valley, from Kern County all the way up to the San Joaquin and everywhere in between. Like I said, we're based out of Visalia, but, we kind of expand anywhere from, not just necessarily the valley, but we also go into the foothills, places like Mariposa. We see a number of communities in the Mariposa area and Kern County as well, that have wells that are located in more hill areas. Typically, those are, mostly rock wells, things like that. But quite a big service area. It's roughly the size of South Carolina. It's about 29,000 square miles that we service. So a little bit more in depth about what we do. So we talked about that emergency preparedness portion. That's more educational stuff. We have a team that is specifically designated towards educating, outreach, getting people informed. They attend different fairs and events in which they can, disperse educational materials. For example, the World Ag Expo in Tulare County. We attend that. We have a booth there. Different events like that. We try to make sure that we're involved in the community and that we can do some outreach and get some people educated about emergency response. So that's preparedness when an emergency actually does happen, specifically in this case, when a well goes dry, a domestic well goes dry. What happens is they give us a call and we respond to it. Initially, all of our technicians carry about 30 gallons of bottled water with them, just to make sure that when they do go out to these areas, specifically like a home or a small property, they have bottled water, clean drinking water that they can supply with the homeowner. Once they've been determined to be eligible for the program, they are given, we put them on a tanks and hauled water program. That includes our folks, one of our contractors, depending on where you're at, actually physically delivering and installing a tank, which is connected to the home, and then you're enrolled into a hauled water program to where typically every 2 weeks, a tank will come out and refill your tank. Now that's non-potable water. That's for things like, washing dishes, showers, and everything in between, not drinking. As in tandem with that tank program, there's also a bottled water program to where bottled water is also delivered about every 2 weeks. And that is for, things like drinking, cooking, and things of that nature. In between, while all of that's going on, we have our water well repair and replacement or connections segment of our services. That includes anything from, we do a well assessment and determine, okay, does your well need to be deepened? Do you need an entirely new well? Can you be connected to a city system? That isn't necessarily as common, but if it's possible and the home is eligible to be connected to a public system, we definitely advocate for that. But typically what it is it comes down to either drilling or repairing an existing domestic well. And for the record, this does not include any ag wells or municipal wells, production wells. This is strictly domestic wells. Typically for one property, one home. Sometimes there's a couple homes on a single property, but it's for small domestic situations. Once we've come to that permanent solution, which would be repairing or replacing the well, we have our water quality program to where once the well has been drilled or replaced, the water's tested, we send it to our labs, make sure that the water quality is acceptable. If the water quality is not acceptable, then we typically install either a POE or a POU system. POE is point of entry, POU is point of use. Filtration system, that can be anything from a membrane system to activated charcoal filtration. Depending on the situation and what contaminants you have, we respond accordingly. And then lastly, there is the educational and resiliency portion of the program to where once you do have a new well, or if you do have a filtration system, something like that, we make sure that we educate the folks that have been a part of the program. How do you maintain that well? What do you need to do to make sure that that well lasts longer? Perhaps it's a pump issue or how to maintain a pump. It's also, you'd be surprised, for a significant amount of well owners, they actually don't know how wells work. They just think it's a hole in the ground that you pump water out from. There's typically a lot more to that, and we also go over things like that. Where is the strata? How deep is your well? What can be a future issue should you encounter another issue in the future? Things like that. So that is kind of just a broad overview of the process for our emergency services. Ideally, what we would be doing is we would be the first contact. So should we, contract with the GSA, you know, a lot of times folks don't know who to call. They might call their irrigation district, or they might call the county, or they might call the GSA or the subbasin, what have you. The intention is that we would be the first contact when someone's well goes dry. Again, domestic well, not ag well. So we would take on that responsibility. So when it comes to the first phone call, we respond then, we get somebody out to your property, do a well assessment, and then go forth from there. So again, kind of our tanks and hauled water program, after we've received the call, we will go out to the property. Our technicians will make an assessment of the property itself and the well itself. That includes a general site assessment, you know, anywhere from viewing Google Maps or different mapping programs to see, okay, is this one singular well on the property? Is there multiple wells? Are there other things that could be impacting the quality of the water, things like that? And then we sound the well as well. So we try to see, okay, A, is there any water whatsoever in the well? Is the well completely dry? Is the well as deep as the well completion report says it is? Could this potentially be a collapsed well? All of those things are taken into account when the assessment is done. And then once the assessment is complete, then a tank can be installed on the property to where the home is supplied with non-potable hauled water. And that's what we would call an interim solution. That's not a permanent solution. So before we can get to the permanent solution, which would be ideally, you know, well-functioning well, we have this tank program. And that's not a long-term program. A little bit more in detail. So we provide up to 60 gallons of bottled water per month. Usually it's between the deliveries, it's about 30 gallons of bottled water delivered every 2 weeks. We deliver that to whether it's a small community side, small community water systems are a little bit different. That's actually a different department than what emergency services does, but we all work in tandem. But specifically, we focus on small property domestic wells. On initial site assessment, 30 gallons of bottled water is delivered kind of automatically when the site assessment is being completed. They are left with the 30 gallons of bottled water. On approval, to start water services, participant information is provided to bottled water vendor and put on a schedule for delivery route. Again, that's about every 2 weeks. Daily correspondence with participants and vendors is made to ensure that water deliveries for enrolled homes is happening on a regular basis. So say someone missed a delivery or, you know, someone still didn't get their bottled water delivered. We're, again, the point of contact of that, we're always in constant communication with our vendors, whether it be, you know, we contract with local vendors depending on where it's at. But we do really try to make that effort to make sure that drinkable, safe, clean drinking water is available to any of our participants at any given time. So our community water systems, again, it's very similar to our domestic water systems, but obviously a little bit more complex. There's some different factors that go into that. How many systems are on the, or how many homes are actually on the system? How many connections? Can we get a tank that's big enough to supply those communities? And for example, some of the small communities that we currently serve, Tullyville, Seville, Tilly Creek, Ridgecrest, and Spring Mountain. And there's a few a few communities in between, but that is another aspect of the services that we provide. So community response steps, we coordinate with all parties involved. That includes the State Water Resources Control Board, any small local community or municipal systems. Again, ideally, if we can hook you up to a community system, that would be ideal as opposed to having a single individual well. And any other, you know, the GSAs, the subbasins, those are all folks that we're in constant communication with as, you know, we enroll this outlay this program. We identify the nature of the emergency. So do they need water? Do they have an existing tank? You know, a lot of folks already have existing tanks. That's something that we can, you know, typically piggyback off of. A lot of those other factors, can we enlarge do they need a larger tank? You know, how many folks are actually dependent on the water that's being delivered? So if we can enlarge the tank, if necessary, we can do that. We also coordinate internally for logistical and, you know, deployment stuff. So all of our teams are working together. We have a number of very highly trained technical field staff that are capable of, you know, kind of performing all of these duties, whether it be bottled water deliveries, well assessments, site assessments, things like that. part of that, we identify the source for hauled water. So again, Sparklets, for example, is one of the organizations that we contract with. We see where the closest vendor is so that we can actually make those timed 2-week deliveries for fresh, clean drinking water. We arrange for ongoing support by securing water hauler who will make ongoing deliveries, again, kind of part of that coordination. And then we also, again, collaborate with any local systems to see what the best solution would be for that individual person or home. A lot of that is dependent on service area of different communities. If someone is way on the outskirts of Modesto, they probably aren't within city limits or the service area for that city connection. So those are all things that are taken into account. So our field team, again, everyone has been trained not only in the technical side of things, but when folks lose access to clean drinking water, that sometimes can be a traumatic experience. We understand that, and so our folks are also trained to handle folks who are experiencing this, sort of tragedy or trauma response type stuff. If you have small children or elderly folks in the home and they don't have access to clean drinking water, that's an emergency. They need to be provided for often, and so that can be a very difficult thing to deal with. And so our team is not only trained on the technical side, but also on that traumatic response side as well. So some additional services. Initially, we do the site assessment. The initial site assessment is what we call. That's everything from the physical outlay of the home, as well as the existing well that has been damaged and or dry. So we make notes of that, and all of that is taken into account. But we also do tank inspections. So once the tank has been installed, we need to verify that it's actually functional. Is the home having issues with that tank? Is there a weatherization problem? We weatherize our equipment once it's installed, but sometimes if you have chickens, like chickens love to peck at the weatherization on some of those pipes. So at every assessment, we make sure that everything is functional, not going to be at risk for potential freezing or other events that would disrupt that hauled water from getting into the home. Again, bottled water storage and logistical deployment, that's all stuff that we coordinate with local vendors. Community bottled water deliveries, again, that's another thing when it comes to the small community systems. It's kind of treated as a whole, but individual homes within the system are supplied with that bottled water. Again, that's just more coordination with our vendors. And then emergency response. So part of that is the education, part of that is the traumatic experience response that our technicians are capable of handling. Our well assessments. So after we receive the phone call, one of our technicians will visit the home. They're always packing at least 30 gallons of water with them. So upon that initial site assessment, they deliver that gallon, those 30 gallons of water, and then that's when they perform their duties, such as well assessment, site assessment, things like that. Upon the initial site assessment, that is when we collect necessary documents just to make sure that do you even qualify for the program itself. There's a number of criteria that you need to qualify for that you have to be, you have to qualify for in order to be eligible for the program. A full well assessment and reports are submitted for approval. That would also go back to the GSA and the organization that is implementing the services, just to make sure that they have the approval as well. So these things are being reviewed by the GSAs in order to verify that the participants are indeed eligible for the program. Tank inspections, again, after 6 months. Once the tank has been installed, 6 months later, we will go back, make sure that the tank is actually functional. It is installed up to our standards. It's been appropriately weatherized. Quality is acceptable. Sometimes, we get folks where their tanks have been overrun by contaminants, things like that. So we also do a sanitization of our tanks as well, just to make sure that the water that's actually going into the home isn't going to put the family at risk. Things like the tanks are supposed to be sealed, but homeowners sometimes pop open the tank, or if you have children, sometimes they like to get up top and unscrew it and do whatever, and you have things like animals that fall in, you get a raccoon or a squirrel or something that falls in the tank. Obviously, that's a big issue. But that is something that is also accounted for. If that, and should that happen, we would then replace the tank, send the tank back to get sanitized, and then the home or the domestic well owner would be supplied with a brand new clean tank. And then, of course, weatherization is a portion of that as well. So our bottled water storage and logistical deployment, again, we have a large warehouse in Visalia where our folks can restock, our individual technicians can restock their 30 gallons for when they do the initial site assessment. But on top of that, we also, of course, are in constant contact with our bottled water vendors. We have an entire team devoted strictly to bottled water and bottled water deliveries for both individuals and small communities. So they do a very good job, actually, of making sure that they're in constant communication. We have a number of bottled water vendors. Again, Sparklets is just one of the big ones. They seem to be everywhere. But there's also smaller bottled water folks that we contract with as well. Domestic water and well repair, replacement, and connection program. So again, depending on what the situation is, let's say your electrical panel has gone out. That necessarily wouldn't be a GSA issue. Would we still respond to it? Of course. But that wouldn't be something that the GSA, that's not an impact of the, over pumping or groundwater quality, things like that. If you have tree roots that grow through your casing, things like that, not necessarily a GSA issue. Now, if a well goes dry because the groundwater table has dropped, that would be a GSA issue and then still fall under the program. But those are a lot of the specific questions that we get a lot. If your well has collapsed, that's kind of a tricky one. Who's responsible for your well collapsing? Is that a result of the groundwater table lowering? I know in 2023, when the ground got really saturated, we actually saw a significant number of well collapses just because they were supported so long by the kind of hardened earth around them. Then once that ground kind of softened up, we saw a lot of collapsing in that case. Sure, thank you. Some eligibility criteria. So the grant, essentially in this case, we are the lender. We're not actually the contractor with the well drillers. We do that for a number of reasons, but one of the criteria is that if we do get a well replacement or a new domestic well, you're required to hold on to the property for at least 5 years. That's to prevent, folks from coming in, buying a property, getting a new well for free, and then selling it and turning it around. That's not, we try to avoid that as much as possible. That's why you have that 5-year minimum criteria. A maximum of $57,500 per well. That doesn't include all the other services that are incorporated with it, from tanks and bottled water. That is strictly just for well replacement. So we contract with a number of, well, we don't personally contract, but we're in communication with a number of drillers that are local to the area. And we ensure that those estimates that we get, they all need to be within or underneath the $57,500 line. There are no payments or interest to the homeowner. Again, we kind of act as the lender in that situation. But the grant may cover existing well repair, replacement, lateral connections to existing main or local water systems, and abandonment of the existing well. So abandonment's another issue that we encounter quite often. The $57,500 is the typical line that also incorporates or includes the well abandonment, destruction, and new well drilling and or replacement. Eligibility located within the service area of one of the counties that we operate in. Obviously, this county falls within that. It needs to be a private or domestic well only. Again, we don't do ag wells, we don't do municipal wells. This is strictly for domestic drinking water. The well needs to be determined dry or unsustainable as a result of the GSA. Again, something like your panel going out or tree roots growing through it, not a GSA responsibility. The owner, you need to own the property. We contract with the owners, not the tenants. We're in constant communication with the tenants, but the owner actually has to be available to submit documents. This goes through the owner, not the tenants. And the property must be occupied. You can't have an abandoned property that, the well is dry. Doesn't really make sense to be spending money on wells that no one is technically using for domestic drinking purposes. We do have an income requirement that's typically based on an 8-year average that falls around the $62,000 mark. But you must provide proof of eligibility and qualifying program, and then you must retain ownership for a period of 5 years, as I mentioned previously. Process and procedures. So once we get the phone call, the application process starts. We will do, at time of the initial site assessment, we collect all the necessary documents as well as doing the well assessment and the property assessment. That begins your application process. Once the process has been complete, or once the application's been completed, it goes back to our internal team. They review all the documents, verify everything is accurate and appropriate, and then you go to the approval process. The approval process is just ensuring that what documents have been received are actually accurate and honest. And then we go to phase 4, which is typically well construction or deepening or replacement or repair. And then following the well construction, then it goes to the quality assurance side, so making sure that the quality of water is acceptable for human consumption. So we oversee the entire process of well construction. That goes from beginning to end and everything in between. Pre-construction well assessment, just making sure that wherever they do drill the well, we rely a lot on the drillers to do that information, but we are verifying that where they want to drill a well is going to be an appropriate place to construct a brand new well. We complete the vetting of estimates. So the homeowner would contract with they would receive a number of estimates from the drillers themselves. They submit those estimates to us. We review them to make sure that they're accurate, that they fall under that $57,000 mark, that there isn't some obscure charges, things like that. So those are all vetted by our well team. We coordinate with the well drillers to make sure that construction happens at an appropriate time, if it's okay with the homeowner, things like that. We're more intermediary between the drillers and the homeowners themselves. We don't contract specifically with the drillers. That would be through the homeowner and the driller themselves. We just maintain the oversight to make sure, is the homeowner protected from the driller? Is the estimate appropriate for what they're wanting, what they're needing? And then again, making sure that our drillers are acting responsibly, again, for the safety of the participant. You got it.
I appreciate it. I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep
No,
you short.
no worries.
My audience here pretty soon.
I got you.
I
So,
want to save time for questions for you.
sure. And then our water quality program, once the well is drilled, you have an actual, healthy supply of water. Is that water safe for human consumption? Water quality program, we oversee all of this. We collect the samples ourselves, submit them to a lab, making sure, if the water's clean, great. If it's not, what kind of filtration system do you need? Just more water quality stuff. So those are some of the main contaminants that we see throughout the valley. Obviously, things like nitrates. Nitrates are everywhere, but we come across quite a few different contaminants and then respond accordingly depending on what contaminant is within the water. Yeah, just an overview. Again, coming back to the educational portion, a lot of folks have a well, but they don't know how it works or really what it is. So we make sure that we educate them on all components of groundwater well, just to make sure that in the future, if they do have issues, they're a little bit more educated and prepared on how to respond to those issues with the well. Sorry, really quick, lastly, our emergency services program specifically has had around 4,753 interactions. That's as of 2019, I believe. 7,954 folks on our bottled water program, 764 new wells drilled, and then 25 connections to a public water system. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks, Matt. Couple of real quick things. So I'm curious if there are other funding sources available. Does she work through those programs potentially first before coming to GSA as mitigation source?
If we were contracted with the GSA, it would go through the GSA and self-help individually. We are a state-funded organization as well. So a number of our programs or individuals involved do receive services through state funding, but we are contracted with a number of GSAs throughout the valley and in communication with a few others, including
So we could technically get them temporary water, and then if you were aware of a grant they might be eligible for, then you could help them get that grant as opposed to just going to the GSA and get their well funded through us instead. Is that,
My hunch is that, that would be more on the GSA side, GSA responsibility to pursue grants for additional funding. Yeah, there's not a specific instance in which self-help would pursue a specific grant for that situation. That being said, we are always, constantly looking for additional funding sources. But if you can find one that works, then yeah, we'd be more than happy to assist, I'm sure.
and then there's, there's a number of different things that you offer. There was about 8 different things on one of the slides you had. And my understanding is we could utilize self-help and contract with you to provide 1, 2, 3, all 8 of those services, correct?
Yeah,
Doesn't have to be the full gamut.
not necessarily. That is a unique situation, and it's a conversation that's been had with other folks. We're not currently contracted with any specific organization that has kind of picked and choosed what services that they want. Not to say that that's not a conversation that we can have. I see no problem with that. I think we would be happy to work with you on that.
Yeah, because we kind of envisioned, at least starting off with self-help, because with the timeline and everything, at least from the committee's standpoint. And then if there were some efficiencies or other options or needs, then it would be an adaptive program to maybe pull one of those things off your plate or add one on or whatever. So
Yeah,
we were kind of thinking that might be a good way to go.
yeah. Was there anything specifically that you're?
No, I just want to make sure the option was out there
Yes.
and get feedback from everybody on that, obviously.
Yeah, that would be an option.
Okay, and then I saw the $57,500 max per grant, per well. Is that a fixed amount? Is that something that we can decide that if we don't want it to be 57,500, we want it to be 30,000? Is that something that we can do and that's at our discretion?
Yes, yeah. The 57,500 is strictly for our grant-funded wells. So if you wanted the max to be 40,000, yeah, that's certainly an option.
And then I also saw private domestic well only, and speaking to Mr. Rano's comment, so no public domestic wells. You're not mitigating for public supply wells.
That's correct, yes.
And is that just because they have ratepayers? It's not just a single family type of situation? Why is that?
That's a really
typical
good
with
question.
grants?
We've never been in the business of doing, the public municipal side. We've been more devoted to domestic well owners, rural domestic well owners that typically aren't capable of supplying that themselves. So that's kind of the origin of where we came from, which is probably why we haven't reached the public municipal side of it yet.
Yeah, and typically those municipal supply wells are larger wells, deeper wells, so I wouldn't think you'd see that as often, but I was just curious why that was, so. Okay, thank you. Any other member agencies? Yep, Jeff?
Just to note, though, there are probably even municipal wells that are in underdeveloped or underprivileged communities that could need assistance, just because a city is capable of rehabbing the well and they have the funds, that's good for them, but there are underprivileged communities that do not have the funds for that, so that
Right,
should
like
be
improvement
considered.
districts, there's some in OAD, yeah, that's a good point.
And like I mentioned, there are small community systems that we do work with. But when it comes to, larger cities, larger public systems,
Yeah.
that's typically what we avoid.
Okay, I just saw that word private.
Just one clarification on the grant funding. Does that come from a limited fund amount where we potentially want to reduce the amount, or is that pretty much open? So regardless of how many wells there are, you would be able to meet that max of 57,500.
Yeah, the number of participants doesn't influence that price. The 57,500 was, I'm not entirely sure where that came from. I know that it's a culmination of, different estimates, things that we've kind of discovered locally, what the average is. But the number of participants wouldn't influence that price tag. Again, but that's more up to the GSA themselves to determine where that price falls. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Anything else? No?
No, that's good.
Okay.
We give the audience.
Tim? Christie?
So with the GSAs, that self-help has agreements for supporting with implementing well mitigation plans. So when you go out there and complete the assessment, and if it's ultimately determined that the failure wasn't due to GSA management activities, does that transfer over to the state grant?
Typically, yes. Yeah.
Do you foresee, or can you tell us if you foresee any changes with respect to that funding being available in the future through the state?
Yeah, funding is a tricky one with the state. Fluctuates a little bit here and there. The state has been very vocal about making sure that wells that go dry that are a GSA responsibility will be the GSA's responsibility. Again, we're always pursuing additional funding, but at the moment, without getting into too much detail, funding is a tricky thing right now with both federal and state funding. So yeah, the state has been vocal about GSA responsibilities being paid for by the GSA.
Because that's really an ideal partnership, right?
Yeah, and it's a sustainable partnership as well.
Absolutely. One more question. Can you give us an idea of maybe like an average and the range of the costs that you have seen for consolidations?
That's a really good question. I mean, we've seen everything, and that depends on, that's that local communication and coordination as well. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. For example, there was one connection in Kern County where the initial estimate was $300,000 to connect to a main. Obviously, that's not really reasonable for the folks involved. So we decided to actually put another domestic well there instead, just because it was cheaper and made better sense. In Tulare, there's an example of a home that actually falls within the service area of the public system, but the city actually denied it because they denied all new domestic wells within that service area, but they were in a situation to where it would have been way too expensive. City didn't want to pay for it, homeowner couldn't pay for it, things of that nature. So actually we coordinated with them and have a very unique agreement to where we drilled them a new well. They did get that replacement well, but in 5 years, when that service area of the public water system expands, they will connect, and then the city or the state will utilize the new domestic well as a monitoring well. So it really is dependent on who the organization is and where it's located. But those solutions are things that we're always open to conversation with.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much. We've only got a couple slides left, right, Iris? That you were gonna run through? So I think before we go out to the public, let you finish off just for anybody who, yeah, your last slides. And then whoever wants to leave after that, and we won't lose people before 3:30 too much. And then open it up for questions at the very end on all of the rest of the presentation, both self-help and Iris's last point.
I'm not sure, I didn't put it up.
Thank you. Perfect. Yeah, let me catch up with where we are. So you've heard from self-help, there will be an eligibility review, there will be an application that's going to document, like, where's the well? What is the basic status of the well pump, facility information, right of entry? These are all things that are being handled. And the GSA in coordinating is establishing a committee to administer its program. It's starting to coordinate with self-help and will continue to do so with outreach. Again, we touched on the benefits of having one place to go to get the ball rolling on a dry well problem. The GSA is developing its own process in coordination with self-help. It'll have its own criteria for eligibility to make sure that it's really a basin management issue, and its own application, which very well may ask for more information than self-help asks for, because, again, the specific eligibility. So that's kind of a glimpse of the application process we're looking at. And I do appreciate the comment about how other GSAs have, in some cases, very detailed well mitigation plans. Frankly, they go on and on and on to exquisite detail. And, yeah. And I suspect that this GSA will find the happy medium, a reasonable process. So what's next? Well, we're going to finish development of the draft well mitigation plan. We're going to be coordinating with self-help, so that will be integrated into the plan specifically as we move along. And then the idea is, we will have a draft which will be available. We're going to develop and implement the well mitigation program by January 31st, 2026, and that's per the GSA resolution. So those are the basic next steps. I think that's it.
Thanks. You go back one slide for me. Perfect. Yeah, so we want to get feedback on, and hopefully stick around, and she can stick around in general for any questions that come up. And so we'll open it up for public feedback at this point on the well mitigation plan and utilization of self-help enterprises.
My question is for your well program, and it sounds extraordinary and very necessary. And I think one of the things that you could really bring to the party is the experience around all of the different counties that you've worked in, because there's probably nothing you haven't seen. And it's like having a PCA that sees all the different almond orchards, right? And they bring that experience to the table. I think some of what you offer, there's limitations, there's short-term solutions. The water, bottled water would have me concerned because when people sit in their garage in the heat, you're going through a lot of plastic, it's not really good for the environment, but it's great and it's necessary in an emergency situation. It is appropriate. The tanks, I grew up in tank water, grew up in Australia in the Blue Mountains. Frogs were our issue, but we collected our own rainwater. So again, it's not perfect. So I think what I can see from it is where you're able to connect with surface water, that's the ideal long-term solution for the city and for the health of the people. I think one question I have for you as it applies to the program for the GSA is you explain the criteria for applying to the program. And it sounded like you said that the income was going to be $60,000 to $100,000. No. Okay.
Yeah, our current criteria is around 62,000 household income.
Household income. So if I'm trying to think of Modesto as where your program is going to fit in examples, and we have a house on our property that would fit that, right? It's got an old well. I don't know if it would go dry because of GSA. That's a whole different criteria that you've got to walk through. But the income of the tenants would be under $100,000. But the people that own the land is going to be beyond that. So if you're talking about the owners having to meet that criteria, there may be people grandfathered into this area that own homes that make that amount of money, but not many people making $60,000 a year are buying homes. And so it would be interesting to know what the demographics, how many it's going to apply to in this area. And I still think you're very useful and very important, don't get me wrong. But it's a question that the GSA is going to have to consider, right? What is the use of the demographics given? And maybe there's other funds that you can get access to that would have a higher limit of income, or you could apply to the tenant and not to the owner.
So when we take participants in, it is based on the owner of the property, not the tenant. We do to non-renewal tenants, that we have their contact information, of course, they can be, let onto the property, but all documentation is signed by the owner of the property. They own land, partake is on the land, they sign that, and they have to be under $62,000. To your point that not many people with that much money a year buy homes, we have a lot of participants in our pipeline. Yes, of course. There are a lot of participants in our pipeline, and they make under that amount and they own their home, so it might need to be like a statistical techniques run, I'm not sure, but yeah, I mean, it's up to the GSA if they wanna change
Yeah,
that, but.
I think that's a parameter that's ultimately up to the GSA that we would iron out in the next step.
I can only speak on one.
Yeah, okay. It's interesting.
Was there anything else that I missed?
No, that was just.
Yeah, just a few follow-up questions regarding that. It sounds like you've already heard this presentation, Eric, and maybe the rest of the board. Were you thinking that the GSA was gonna need two programs then? One utilizing SHE for the people that would qualify under their guidelines, and another one for those that don't fall under the income-specific guidelines? Is one question or thought I have. Same with if the LLC owns an orchard and they have rental houses for their employees. I think to Ms. Dorothy's point there, the other one is, what's the funding for SHE? Is this like a cost plus model? Because I think, Rhett, you mentioned that, that the GSA would be paying for the well, fix anyway. So what's the funding model for SHE, as well? So, thank you.
All those are pretty much contract terms as far as, what their history is through grant funding and they're facilitating those programs, but this would be a GSA-funded program and GSA-funded wells. So as far as the income level and those sorts of things, that would be decided on by the GSA in the terms, and that would be kind of probably the next stage. We would provide those details and tell you what our thoughts were. It would be.
You're not taking their current slide presentation and dropping it onto the GSA. There would be some modifications, to their program that would be
Tailored to,
GSA facilitate the.
correct, yeah.
We also do have, certain fixed administrative costs associated with the program.
Right, so, I mean, they essentially would be the staff to facilitate the program, and we would give them parameters to facilitate it. Yeah. And, well, just to clarify too, just the committee members, the ad hoc committee members have vetted and had one presentation by SHE prior to this. The rest of the board has not. Anybody else? No? Anybody on the phone? Okay. So bring it back. I don't hear any objections to the recommendations of the committee. So I think we may end up just moving forward with that in that direction. So thank you very much to the members of SHE for coming out. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Iris. Very good presentation. Appreciate you sticking with the time. Sorry to cut you short a little bit there. But we got most of the questions. It looks like we got all the questions answered, so that's great. This is just, yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So that was just a discussion item. As I mentioned previously, no action will be taken, and we'll end up wanting to take this back to our own boards and councils, educating them on kind of where we're at, what the status is, and what the next steps are. And then we would come back to another GSA meeting, not a workshop, but a GSA meeting to formally take action on a well mitigation program. The next steps, like Iris said, is going to be actually getting a document together, which will iron out some of these other details we talked about today. So moving on to item 4, the next workshop, that's still to be determined. We've done a lot of legwork, and we're hoping to come back and do a workshop with a focus on management action. So we're keeping the time to right around that 2-hour timeline. Hopefully the next month and a half, something like that, maybe early July. We'll have something ready to be back here and talk about management actions. Questions, comments from member agencies on the next workshop? No? Anybody from the audience on the next workshop?
So you think the next workshop's gonna be early July, discuss management action.
Generally, time-wise, I'm hoping, yep. And it's actually gonna be Wood and Current, and they're not here today, but they're gonna be, the focus is gonna be on they're handling the management areas aspect of this, this committee and this effort, so. Oh, Dominic is here. You wanna speak to that, Dominic? You wanna make any commitment to that? All right, that's what we're shooting for. All right, item 5, committee comments, reports. We've had no committee meetings since the GSA meeting last week. There are any director's comments? No? All right, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. All right.
Seems like